Welcome to part 2 of VatCan's Introduction to Euroscope CanScope video. In part 1, we examined the basic layout of the Euroscope screen and we explored the first few menus in Euroscope, and we managed to get you connected hopefully to a Sweatbox server and get your voice channels configured. We're now going to continue along with the remainder of the menus that we didn't look at last time and explore the rest of the functionality of Euroscope that you'll need on a regular basis. So last time we left off, we dealt with voice communication and ADIS setup. So we're going to continue with the next menu button here, which is the Open SCT menu. SCT is a sector file. It's the extension for a sector file, which is basically a data file that provides all the information needed to display and operate within a chunk of airspace. So on the sector file menu, you'll see there are a lot of different options. We're going to actually sort of start towards the bottom here. One that you probably will use on a regular basis. All these things down here basically load additional data into Euroscope. A lot of the information in Euroscope is stored in separate data files so that you can reload updated data files as you obtain them. One that you will probably use on a somewhat regular basis, at least a few times a year, is the Load Sector File option. When you click on this, it gives you an option it brings up a file dialog, and you can search through your file structure to find updated sector files that you've downloaded. I currently have the most up-to-date one right now, which is the 1411 CZYZ 1411 sector file here. So I'm not going to bother to reload it, but to give you a bit of a sense of what would happen, if I did reload it, it would replace the existing sector file for this view. And as I said, sector files basically contain all the information that you need to operate within a chunk of airspace. So everything that you see drawn on the radar screen here is contained within that sector file, as well as lots of things that aren't turned on right now. Things such as airways, airports, approaches, SIDS and stars, navigation aids. You can turn on geography. You can turn on text for various labels and whatnot. So everything that you need pretty much is stored within that sector file. So it's a very critical file. It's a rather large file, and it's updated periodically by your FIR. You'll probably have an announcement when an updated version is available for download. When you do load a new sector file, one of the most important things I find is to then disable the ability of Euroscope to find the previous sector files. So you could do this any number of ways in your file system. You can go in and rename the previous file. You could move the previous file or even delete the previous file. Change it in some way that Euroscope cannot find it. What Euroscope then does, which is very smart, is that every time you now open another view, which we're about to talk about in a minute, if it can't find the sector file that's referenced within that view, then it will ask you if you want to use the existing sector file. Simply click yes because it can't find the old one, and so the view will open with the new sector file loaded into it, and it will from then on save that sector file, that new sector file with the views when you save them. So that's a very useful feature because oftentimes once you start using Euroscope a fair bit, you'll have a lot of different views available, and you won't want to have to manually associate each one. Once you load a new sector file, it's easier to just let Euroscope automatically do it as you open those views again and again and again. So that's basically it for loading a sector file. It's not too difficult. What you'll use the sector menu for more is loading different views into Euroscope. So basically the way it works is each view that you load is kept in a separate file. You can load as many different views as you like. The top half of the menu here basically has the 8 most recently opened views that you've used. You'll notice they have a .asr extension. And down here you have the ability to open, close, or save, or create new radar displays, so you can open ones that are not in your most recent ones. So to use an example, if I wanted to load CYYZ ground, I now have opened a view of the ground, the airport layout in Toronto, zoomed in very close to see the airport layout. You'll notice as well, since the first video, I've also loaded some aircraft into the Sweatbox server just to show you what it looks like with various aircraft. Also, next to the Open Sector menu, you'll notice now that the label contains the name of the view that I'm currently looking at. If I left-click on this label, I now have the ability to go and switch back to any of the other views that I currently have open. So when I opened a new view, it didn't close the existing view, it just simply opened the new one and showed that one. If I want to go back to my previous view, I can simply click on it there. Another very useful trick, and you'll use it a lot, is you can hit F7 to do the same thing to scroll through your entire list of views. So F7 to scroll back and forth. In this case, I only have 2, so it's just flipping back and forth. You can have pretty much as many views as you want to have open. So if I wanted to use an arrival view for Toronto, So here's the arrival view for Toronto. And again, if I hit F7, it scrolls through all 3 views in order. You'll also see them on the menu here. So you can have multiple views open in one screen of Euroscope, or you can have multiple screens, each one with its own separate view using the proxy server that we discussed earlier in part 1. If you want to close a view that you no longer are interested in, there's 2 ways to do it. You can either go into the sector menu and press the close button, which will close that view and remove it from your loop, or a little bit quicker shortcut is to use F1, press F1. You'll notice that down here in the bottom corner, F1 has now been put into the input box, and then hit 0 on your keyboard. And F10 will close the current view. You'll notice that the current view disappeared and it switched back to one of the other ones. If I click over here on the menu bar, you'll notice now once again that there's only 2 open views. The third one that I had open, I closed it and it no longer appears in this list. So now I just simply scroll back and forth between the 2 views if I hit F7. The nice thing about views is that they can be used for multiple different things. You can have different views for different airports, zoomed in, zoomed out for a tower view perhaps, and you can even have different configurations of the same airport. To use Toronto as an example again, we can have an arrival view for runway 33 available to us, and we can also have an arrival view for runway 06 available to us, depending on which runway is active, and we can switch between these views, or we can load the view that's most convenient without having to reconfigure everything on the screen to be displayed for this new view. So the idea behind the views is that you create one for each situation that you might need, and you don't have to constantly turn items on and off, displayed items on and off. You just simply load the whole view and it loads everything all at once. Next to the view, right now you'll see a little blank space. If I click on any of the aircraft here in my lists or anywhere on the screen, you'll see that it actually pops up a call sign of this aircraft here. This is basically your current selected aircraft. So when you're sending a text message to someone, this is the aircraft it will be addressed to. Also, if you perform certain keyboard actions, this is the aircraft that it'll be addressed to, so you can always see which aircraft is active here. Next to that, we have a clock, pretty self-explanatory. It's based on your computer's clock, converted to UTC, converted to Zulu time. Next, we have the Other Settings menu. This one is one of the most in-depth menus that in Euroscope. Most of the time, you're not going to use a lot in this menu. You'll see there's all sorts of various configuration options you can set for Euroscope here, talking about tags, sounds, system messages, all sorts of things can be set up in here. We really don't, on a regular basis, use too many of these options. However, I'll point out a few things here. Under General Settings first, General Settings has a lot of general settings for Euroscope. Again, most of the default options are usually pretty good. There's a few things that you want to make sure you have set up the way you like them. First, at the top here, there's a couple of hotkeys that we can change. First is the Aircraft Select key. The Aircraft Select key is not something you'll necessarily use a whole lot, but it can be a very useful key. Basically, if you input a command into the text box down here at the bottom of the screen, and then select a certain aircraft so that it is the current selected aircraft, you can then use the Aircraft Select key to send that command to the currently selected aircraft. I've got the left square bracket here selected. It's a key I don't use very much in normal typing, so it works pretty well. Probably more common for you to use will be the Primary Frequency Send key. I found this a very helpful feature. The Primary Frequency Send key, basically when you're typing in any window at the bottom of the screen, any of these message windows are active at the bottom of the screen. It doesn't matter which one you're looking at. If you hit enter, it normally puts it into that chat window. However, if you hit the Primary Frequency Send key, it will, instead of sending the message into whatever current window you're looking at, it will automatically send it on your current primary frequency. So you don't have to worry about accidentally sending instructions to someone else that you're chatting with. If you hit the Primary Frequency Send key anytime you want to transmit a text message on the network, it will send it in your current frequency. A very useful key if you get used to using it instead of the enter key anytime you're typing a message for transmission on your frequency by text. I have mine select to the star key on the asterisk on the number pad. Set it to something that you definitely will not use in normal typing. If you can't use the star key on your number pad, tilde at the top left of your keyboard might also be a very useful, might be a very good key because you're not going to use that very often. As I said in the middle, I'm not going to deal too much with what's going on in the middle here. One down here at the very bottom are a couple of options that I like to talk about just briefly. We have basically the professional mode area here, and we have some options for something called correlation. Correlation basically increases the realism of Euroscope. When an aircraft initially logs onto Euroscope, or when information about an aircraft is initially received by Euroscope from VatSim, I should say, uh, Euroscope plays the dumb ATC computer, and even though it knows who that aircraft is, it tries to match up their squawk code and their flight plan to information it's received from VatSim. If the squawk code doesn't match, or the aircraft is more than the correlation distance, in this case 100 miles off course, then it's not going to automatically correlate the aircraft. That means it's not going to automatically identify it. And to show you what that looks like, here on the radar screen, you'll see I have 3 aircraft targets here, and they're basically stars with just a squawk code and an altitude. No call sign is assigned. It's because we don't know which aircraft. Euroscope has not been able to figure out from the flight plan and the squawk code which airplanes these guys are. What we will then have to do is left click on the aircraft target, click correlate once we've figured out who the aircraft is, and then click on them in our arrival list. Once you do that, then all the information about the aircraft becomes available to you. So this is manual correlation. Euroscope will automatically correlate an aircraft if they're on a correct squawk code. As you can see, these aircraft haven't been assigned any squawk code. It would be listed here if it was assigned. That's why Euroscope couldn't figure out who they were. Once they are correctly correlated, then you'll see the star disappears and we end up with a normal radar target. So back under general settings, so if your correlation mode is C mode or S mode, Euroscope will not automatically correlate aircraft that it can't figure out by itself. It will try to figure them out, but if it can't figure it out, it won't automatically show the aircraft tag. If you go into easy VatSim mode, which you may want to do at the beginning, or if there's a high intensity event that you don't want to waste time correlating aircraft, then it will automatically figure out who everybody is. It won't hide anybody's identity from you. So you'll see all these aircraft, if I double click on them, their identities are automatically included there. One other neat option under professional mode, if you're not in easy mode, is to simulate radar coverage and outage. In the sector files that we talked about, they also have inputted the location of all the radar sites within your FIR. And as aircraft get farther away from those sites, because their line of sight, it becomes hard to see aircraft down low. They start to disappear below the radar screen if they're far enough away from the radar. So this activates that feature to simulate radar coverage and outage. Aircraft at low levels will not be visible on radar. That's basically it for page 1 of general settings. Page 2 of general settings, there's a bunch of error messages up here. But probably the most useful thing that you're ever going to use is the ASR fast keys down here, the display fast keys. So if you hit F1 and then follow by the numbers 1 through 9, it will automatically bring up the specified displays. So this is a shortcut to bring up your 9 most favorite displays. In the beginning, you probably won't use this option too much, but as you start to advance and you start to do radar facilities and you probably have more views available, you're going to start using this a lot. So feel free to configure this however you like, and it makes it much easier and much quicker to load certain views. If I just hit F1 and 2, voila, I've loaded now my center view for runway 06 configuration in Toronto very quickly with very little effort on my part. That's basically it for all you'll need to look at normally under general settings. The other menu you'll look at frequently under the other settings is the display settings. And this really is just about the heart of Euroscope. Display settings basically lets you control what each view looks like, and each view you can turn on and off individual items within the display settings and save and keep them saved with that file for the next time you reload it. So most of the stuff at the top is fairly self-explanatory. You can show aircraft that are squawking A and C and whether or not to show aircraft that are standing by. History dots, so the dots that appear behind a radar target, you can specify how many to display or none at all if you like, 0. You can set an altitude filter. So if you're working a tower position, you probably don't need to see aircraft much above 5,000 or 6,000 feet. You don't need to see who's cruising along at flight level 350. So you could set an altitude limit and not show any aircraft above that. A leader line is a line that appears ahead of an aircraft, and it can be denominated either in miles or minutes, and you can choose a number. And this is basically just shows where the aircraft is going based on their current heading and their current speed, so where they're going to be in so many miles or so many minutes. You can decide to show leader lines, and you can show them along the route. So if the flight plan route has a curve, it'll show the leader line curving along that route. Tag family basically refers to, we can set up different families of tags for different, to simulate different systems, tower systems, radar systems, etc. Normally we'll use CSIT. And simulation mode lets you pick what kind of display you're going to have. Basically, most of the views will have a radar view, but then we also have options for ground views that show the aircraft, much like the ground view I showed you here in Toronto, where you see big white airplane targets taxiing along the ground rather than little radar targets. You also have the ability to lock in a current view, so disable panning or zooming. Normally, in most views, you would be able to move the view around by right-clicking and then dragging the mouse around the screen. And you can use a scroll wheel on your mouse, or F11 and F12 to zoom in and out of a view. So you can change the views as you see fit, and if you need to zoom out just a little bit to see an aircraft outside your view, you can do it very easily. Or you can opt to act like a real radar controller with a locked-in view setting and disable panning or zooming. Below this then becomes really the meat of the display settings dialog. You'll see a tree structure here where you can check mark anything that you want to display. This is basically the entire contents of the sector file, and you can pick what aspects of the sector file you want to display. VORs, NDBs, airports, runways, fixes, etc., etc. You can read. If you see something black, it means that everything in that subcategory has been selected. If you see something gray checkmarked, then that means some parts of that subcategory have been selected. There are some really neat things you can do with Euroscope here. So to take VORs for an example, right now I only have a limited number of VORs turned on in this view. If I wanted to turn them all on, and I wanted the symbol and the name but not the frequency, if I was to click this, it would just simply give me everything, symbol, name, and frequency. Most of the time we don't care about frequency. So what I can do is I unclick the frequency box, select the word frequency, and I double click on it, and it has now removed frequency from everything in the same subtree. All the VORs have now had their frequency removed. That's a really neat trick to make a lot of very quick changes to a certain category. So you can take out the frequencies but leave everything else on. A few other things. Geo for geography. You'll see that not only is a lakeshore drawn around Lake Ontario here, but you can also use that to display taxiways at airports. Free text is various text labels you can have that for various things around the region. Things such as taxiway labels, labels for parking areas, altitude restrictions, etc. And one thing about the way the Euroscope sector files were designed, the sector file predates Euroscope. It goes back to a different radar client, and the same standard was used to make it easy to load into Euroscope. But the way the Euroscope client was written was that there was no way to draw just basic diagrams on the screen. The only way you could draw a basic diagram was under the stars and the SIDS category. So you'll see under the stars category, there's more than just the stars actually available. There's a bunch of different diagrams have been drawn in here. So arrival boxes, holds, and then the SIDS and stars here. If I go under SIDS, you'll see a whole different array of information under there as well. Mostly this is airport related, just the way we simply organized it, because SIDS and stars were the only way to draw things like approaches, holds, control zones, any kind of odd shape that we wanted to display on our screen could only be done in those two categories. So you'll see that there's a lot of weird stuff in those two categories that doesn't necessarily fit, but that's because we're using an older sector file definition that didn't perceive what Euroscope was capable of. So all these display settings are, when you change them, they only change in your current view. If you switch to another view, any changes you've made won't appear there. You have to change the display settings in each view, but that's the power of it, is that each view has its own complete unique set of display settings to display whatever is relevant for that particular view. Just make sure if you do change something, when you exit Euroscope, it'll always ask you if you want to save various changes you've made. Pretty much, unless you've done something really wrong and screwed something up, you'll pretty much always want to save all changes to make sure that the stuff is saved in the files, that you'll be able to access it again in the future. All right, that's pretty much it for other settings. Under Quick Set here, basically Quick Set just controls the various lists around the screen. You can turn them on and off. If you close one, this is how you can get it back open again, is under the Quick Settings menu. We've already talked about the airport selector dialog in part 1. You can go back to that if you need to discuss it again. Beyond this are a bunch of simple buttons that let you just do a little bit of quick control of the screen in Euroscope here. So this button here allows you to turn leader lines on and off. When it's pressed in, they're on. You can adjust the leader lines to be either miles or minutes, and the number, left and right click to adjust the number up or down. So this is just basically controlling directly what was on the display settings, just a quicker control system for you. This button right here is the history dots. You can turn those on and off. You can't control the number. If you want to control the number, you actually have to go into display settings. You can turn on whether to display standby aircraft, again from the display settings. And here we can turn our filters on and off. So right now I have this filter set to ground to flight level 250, 25,000. And if I click on the filter icon, it just takes me back into display settings to change it. If I have no limit, 0 to 0, you'll see it says ground to unlimited. After this are two more very useful little buttons when you become a radar controller. When you're ground and tower, they're not terribly useful, but I'll just a quick explanation of them. The first one here is the distance button, and basically it allows you, if I correlate these two aircraft, there we go. The distance tool, basically you click it and you click on two aircraft and it will show you the distance between those two aircraft. The beauty of this is that it stays on the screen until you remove it, and as they move it'll show you the distance constantly changing, so you can keep an eye on the distance between aircraft. If I look in the top left corner of the screen behind this list here, you'll see now that the two aircraft are listed, and as well as their distance of 5.3 miles apart, it also shows their relative bearing to each other, 147 or 327. If you want to remove any of these distances, you just simply double click and it's gone. The second button is a similar tool, but a little bit different. It is the separation prediction tool. When you click on it, and again click to aircraft, the Euroscope will attempt to predict at what point these two aircraft will be closest, and it will show you a set of lines, as well as a time till they are closest and the distance. So if you have aircraft converging at a certain point and you want to see who gets there first, this would be the tool you'll use. It's not very useful in the local positions, but once you start getting into radar, you'll find you make up a lot of use of the distance and the separation tools. That's basically it for the menu bar. You've just got normal window controls, minimize, and then you can switch between being able to see your taskbar or not, close the Euroscope. If you have multiple screens available, you'll also see a button here with a little arrow on it that lets you send one copy of Euroscope onto the next screen. All right, and that's basically it for the menu bar. Just having a quick look around the screen at the various lists now, just so you can understand them a little bit. You'll see that there are aircraft now populated on them. So our sector inbound list is basically exactly what it says. It's aircraft that are inbound to our sector based on where Euroscope has calculated our sector to be. Based on our position, these are the aircraft that are going to enter our sector in the future. If I was to unpause these aircraft in the sweat box, it would also estimate the time they're going to enter your airspace. An arrival list basically is a list of aircraft that are arriving at your airport, and it shows it just shows who's arrived already, so that you can, as a ground controller, you keep track of who's taxiing and have somewhere to click on these aircraft to highlight them. The sector exit list is basically aircraft that are currently within your sector. So these are the aircraft that are currently under your control. If you hit F3 and tag them up, and you can only tag up aircraft that are properly correlated. There we go. You'll see that now they're on my sector exit list, which means that they are within my airspace and they will be exiting at some point. You'll find that they will list a time they're going to exit and who they're going to be talking to next once this is unpaused, when aircraft are actually moving. Probably more important to you as a ground controller initially will be the departure list. So this shows a list of all the airplanes departing from your active airport and shows lots of useful information. So obviously departure airport, aircraft ID. Over here in brackets, this is the scratch pad. The scratch pad is a neat little feature where you can basically type anything and it will be tagged with that aircraft. Right now you can't see it because that aircraft isn't airborne, but each aircraft does have a scratch pad, And basically, this is only visible to controllers, so information that is relevant to controllers could be put there and it appears right on their radar screen. Things like runway assignments will usually be done there, or if someone's on an unusual heading, something unusual that you want other controllers to be aware of. Next, of course, is the type of aircraft. FR is flight rules, so IFR, 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 no VFRs here. Your destination airport, altitude. So these are the currently issued altitudes, which by default is the filed altitude. Then comes the SID that is assigned, and the runway that's assigned. And over here is the squawk code. So if we left click on a SID, we can assign a new SID from the list. Same thing with a runway. We can assign a different runway if need be. ASSR, assign squawk code. You can either automatically assign one from your bank or you can manually set a squawk code. And then over here at the end we have a little rectangle we can click. Basically this will indicate to us that we've already given an aircraft a clearance when we click it, fill it in. And then we can also talk about the status of the aircraft. We can say whether they've been cleared for push, whether they're taxiing or what. The nice thing about a lot of this information is that it is shared between different copies of Euroscope. So when I click push and I click this little button here, everyone else who's operating in Toronto will see the same information. So they'll have a good idea of what's going on as well. So Euroscope shares a lot of information behind the scenes just to make things easier and to automate a lot of processes. While I'm looking at the departure list, just a few quick points. Most of the stuff you can left and right click on almost everything in here and it will do various things. For example, if I left click on an aircraft's type, it will show me their flight plan route. Euroscope will draw their route on the screen as a blue line with white waypoints. If I left click on it again, it removes it. If I right click on the aircraft's type, it brings up the actual flight plan dialog where I can change anything in the flight plan that the pilot has filed. As you've seen, I can assign SIDs and squawk codes. And another nice thing about the departure list is that it's laid out exactly in the order that you'll give an IFR clearance in your first lesson. So to use this example, Alitalia 651, you're cleared to your destination via the Verdo for departure, flight plan route, departing off 05, and your squawk code is 6360. So you can see everything's in order. You almost just have to read across the departure list once you've verified the information. The next window, one other thing you could do with all the windows too is you can sort things out by clicking on any of the columns. So you can sort by destination, by call sign, by altitude if you wanted, etc. I'm going to window shade this momentarily to grab this list over here. So this list right here with things listed in yellow, this is your list of controllers around you here. So controllers within range. The buttons at the top let you turn on and off various filters, so you can see centers, you can see ATISes, towers, grounds, so you can decide which controllers you want to see. You'll notice that in addition to the controller call sign, you'll also see a little two-letter number code before it, and that is the code that basically is associated with that controller's call sign. So if anyone was to see me on their Euroscope, they would see CYYZ ground, and they'd see NG for north ground, which matches what my code is above the aircraft tag. So you can see who's controlling an airplane by looking at the two-letter tag and then look in the list to see who it is. Other things you can do with the controller list here. If you left click on any one controller, you'll get additional information about the controller here at the bottom of the screen on the status bar. So you'll see the frequency that they're on, their name, and what sector file they're using. In this case, there's no sector file listed because this is just my ATIS. If you double click on the controller list, it opens a chat window with that person, so you can type anything to that person. And you can get responses back. In this case, because it's an automated ATIS, it sent me a little warning message about that. Lastly, if you right-click on anybody in your controller list, you get a little menu, and you can listen to their frequency. I can't do this with my own ATIS. Euroscope won't let me do that, but if I do that, basically all it does is turn on listening to that frequency, turning on receiving of that frequency in the voice communication menu we talked about in part 1. That's a quick and easy way to listen on somebody's frequency rather than trying to find their channel, their proper voice channel in your voice communication list. It then asks that person's client to send information. The next little list we've got down here is the METARS list. So this lets us pull up weather for various locations. And the way to get things into that list is to hit F2. You'll see at the bottom corner of the screen here, it's now put QD into our input box, .qd. and then type in a list of airports that you're interested in. So CYYZ, maybe we're interested in CYTZ as well, and why not CYOW? So then Euroscope will then start retrieving all that information from the network and display it here. It shows only an abbreviated METAR in this list with the two most important things, the winds and the current altimeter. However, if you want to find out the full METAR, click on any one METAR in the list, and again in the status bar, you'll see the entire METAR is printed out here. You'll notice that most of these are yellow until you click on them, and they become white. When a new METAR comes out, it automatically changes back to yellow. The new information is displayed and changes to yellow to show you that your information has changed. If you want to remove something from the METAR list, you can either hit F2 and type that same airport again. F2 CYOW will remove CYOW from my list, or I can double click something. One more thing that shows up here on the METAR list, you'll notice is there's a letter before the METAR. This is the current ATIS letter for that airport. So you'll notice that it is in uniform in Toronto, which is what I've currently selected here. And the nice thing about the METAR list is that any airport that has an ATIS that's controlled by another controller with Euroscope, every time they update their ATIS, your ATIS letter will automatically update even if it's not actually running on your computer. So if there was another controller running Ottawa and they updated their ATIS to Bravo, this would automatically cycle to a B as well to show you what the current information is. And that's all done behind the scenes, so all you have to do is look over here and you can see what the current information is at each airport. This is done through a broadcast by each Euroscope copy. So if you log in after a controller has updated their ATIS, you won't see it until the next time their ATIS updates. If you want to force that to happen, if you want to force that little broadcast to happen, under the voice ATIS setup, every time you click test URL, it sends out that same broadcast, even if you haven't changed the letter. So if you've logged in after somebody, you can ask them to hit test URL, and it will update your ATIS letter on your METAR list. Below the METARs list is another list called FP list, flight plan list. This basically lists aircraft that are within your airspace, or that are visible on your radar screen, I should say, that you can edit their flight plans. So maybe aircraft that aren't going to fly through your airspace, that are not going to show up on any of your other lists, you can see them here. Again, you've got a bunch of buttons here at the top to control the filters for the list. If I do N for all non-relevant traffic, you'll see everything, including the stuff that was on my departure list, pops up here. So this is just another way to get a hold of information about aircraft, especially those that are not going to pass through your airspace. And again, depending on where you left click and right click, if you left click on an airport, departure airport, you'll see that the flight plan is displayed on the screen. Left click again to remove it. If you right click on the airport, same thing. If you left click on the destination, you'll get the flight plan dialog again. And of course, you can left click on the assign squawk code column to assign a new squawk code to an aircraft. Only one more list left to explore, and that's over here on the left side of the screen. It's the voice list. This basically shows you a list of everybody who's connected to your voice channel. It'll show their call signs in white. Right now I'm on the Sweatbox all by myself, so there's nobody else listed. But this is a great way to, again, troubleshoot and help other people figure out if they're connected properly to your channel or not. If they can't hear you and they're not listed here, there's some sort of a connection issue. If they're listed here, it might be just a volume issue, a hardware issue, something like that. That's almost it for Euroscope here. As you can see down here at the bottom of the screen, we now have a couple of tabs of message windows open, including our current primary frequency. One other thing that you can display down here at the bottom in the message window that I haven't mentioned before is you can actually display a flight plan strip. If you press F6, the flight plan strip for your currently selected aircraft, in this case WestJet 673, will be displayed down here at the bottom in the message area instead of a message. And so this basically is just like the normal radar strip that they use in a tower. So we've got aircraft call sign, aircraft type, their filed speed, IFR, I for IFR, departure point, destination, altitude, the routing, and the remarks section as well. So in this case, in the remarks, it just simply has that their call sign, and /v/ indicates that they're voice capable. And over here at the end, you'll see their assigned squawk code when they're assigned one. Right there. The most useful piece of information you get from this usually is the route and the remarks. You usually won't see the route of the remarks anywhere else on your screen, so that's where this becomes really useful without opening up the flight plan dialog. You can quickly see their routing and change it if necessary, or make any amendments you see fit. Of course, we've got the input box down here. You'll notice now that because I've selected an aircraft and I have a primary frequency, you'll notice that by default I can transmit on this frequency. And as I said before, even if I'm in a chat window with somebody else, if I type a message and instead hit my primary frequency send key, you'll see that my message did not go into my CYYZ ATIS window, but instead transmitted by my text frequency 121.65. And that's basically it for Euroscope. You've now seen almost all the functionality of Euroscope, hopefully had a chance to play with it a little bit, and hopefully you'll get your first lesson started that much quicker. I hope that you've learned something in this video, and if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact your instructor. They'll be glad to help answer any questions. In the meantime, I encourage you to get online as an observer when you do have a chance to see other people controlling, listen in, and learn from their experience. Thanks for watching, and look forward to seeing you on the scopes.